Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. As Brian mentioned, this is Doug Bell. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Searchmetrics. I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar. I have to say I'm really excited about the format and the guests and the topic. 2019 predictions, and whenever we do a predictions topic at Searchmetrics, we tend to get a lot of interest. And for this webinar, we've decided to use a different format than maybe you're used to, which is what we're calling a podcast format, where I'm going to be acting as the facilitator, but we're looking for lots of give and take between our panelists. But before we get to that, and before we meet our panelists, just some additional housekeeping. Let's talk about Searchmetrics. For those of you who aren't familiar with Searchmetrics, we're a global provider of search and content marketing software. We actually got our start in Berlin in 2005 as a boutique SEO consulting firm. We realized pretty quickly we weren't able to really help the clients in the ways we needed to at that time without good data. Since that time, we've built the most comprehensive, deepest, and broadest database outside of Google, and we translated that into a global software business. As I mentioned before, we have headquarters in Berlin and offices in London, New York, and in Croatia, and then where I'm coming to you from today in the San Francisco Bay Area. Let's quickly talk about the Voices of Search podcast as well. So each of our panelists today have been guests in the Voices of Search podcast. We actually just passed the 10,000 download mark, which is surprising for a podcast that's really this new. We've had it out there for about 6 months. The way we like to describe the podcast is that it arms SEOs with the latest insights they need to navigate what we like to call the ever-changing landscape of search. And I think today's topic is very much meant to provide additional resources for everybody listening in about how to navigate, especially in 2019. So let's meet our panelists. As I mentioned before, I'm Doug Bell. I'm the CMO of Searchmetrics, Inc. I have had SEO as a cornerstone of my marketing mix since I began my career 20 years ago. I'm a big believer. I'm an evangelist, and I'm really excited to be joined by our panelists today. Let's kick things off by introducing Adam. Adam Edwards has been with Reprise since 2012. And during that time, he has very much expanded the domain of what SEO should entail to tackle problems for the Fortune 500 clients that he serves. And really what he does is he's great, and his firm is great at understanding the potential of ROI of developing new content and undertaking technical projects that improve the overall search experience. Welcome, Adam. Eric Enge was named the 2018 Drum Search Awards Search Personality of the Year. That's a big deal, folks. He was also the 2016 U.S. Search Personality of the Year at the U.S. Search Awards, and was also the Landy's 2016 Search Marketer of the Year. He is the co-author of The Art of SEO, and boy, if you have not seen Eric speak, you've just not been out in the conference scene. He's a frequent speaker, and we're very excited to have him here today. Harrison DeSantis is a rising star of the SEO community. He is the Associate Director of SEO at 3Q Digital. A lot of expertise he's built up over the years includes diving deeply and working with clients in verticals that are all familiar to all of us: e-commerce, publishing, health, and education. Harrison, welcome. As we dig in, folks, here are the topics we're covering today, and I think a lot of these will look familiar, and our hope here is to really kind of dig in and present a slightly different angle into how we think these are going to play out in 2019. Voice search is, of course, a really big topic. The ever-elusive understanding of what's likely to come from Google and their next algorithm update or updates. How RankBrain is being applied. You're going to hear from Harrison on some interesting ideas about how RankBrain is going to be applied to actually judge URL and domain level capabilities. We're going to talk about mobile first, and then we're going to wrap things up with what we're calling SERP Revolution. Okay, let's kick things off. Adam, we're going to start you off, and we're going to ask you to dig a bit into voice search and what you think is on the horizon for 2019. And I'm actually going to quote Harrison here from his participation in a recent Voices of Search podcast, and I quote directly, "I think we're going to start to realize what the ceiling is on our ability to make an impact with voice. And I think we're really going to tone it down a little bit with how many opportunities are actually really there with Home Assistant devices and searches." And I think that Harrison made a couple of really good points when he was speaking about voice search. And one was that there's a certain amount of uplift that's occurring because there's a lot of free or very cheap Google Home and Echo devices that are available. And he also made a point that ultimately technology limits are going to expose the voice search ceiling in 2019. So Adam, what are your thoughts on voice, and where do you think it's headed?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. I really take a long-term view here. As you may remember, it was the year of mobile for several years, and I think we also have the year of voice here for a number of years. There is a lot of skepticism in the market because we don't get a lot of data directly from Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or Apple, and it can be hard to attribute sales back to voice at this point without that. But it's hard to ignore that there's been about 100 million smart speakers sold, and about 2/3 of those have been from the U.S. So even if it's not a perfect experience, people are using these devices, and our job as marketers is to figure that out. I really look at it actually as kind of a can opener when I talk to our clients. So a lot of people are interested in voice. They don't all necessarily know the best way to engage or how to incorporate it into their marketing plans. And that's because it's a confusing environment. If you go to Google, you go to Bing, you go to DuckDuckGo, there are similar experiences. The results are different and the user interface might be slightly different, but it's generally similar. I kind of relate voice back to the wild, wild west of search. And so if you can think back long enough, it was, not necessarily a defined way that search was going to evolve. There were a bunch of portals, if you remember, like Yahoo. Some properties tried a Q&A approach, whether that was algorithmic like Ask Jeeves or even human-powered like Cha-Cha. Vivissimo had a lot of faceting, and ultimately keywords kind of won the day in terms of the search experience. But voice not having, at least as of right now, generally a screen to accompany it, it can be a challenge. But there's lots of different ways that we can tackle this, and recognizing the two primary platforms that are getting the most traction at the start are Google and Alexa, and just recognizing Amazon is primarily driving you to transactional events or get you to install skills, whereas Google is primarily looking at informational queries. And that's where we really have focused a lot. Yes, we can build skills, which are quite valuable, but in terms of like voice search, optimizing for voice is similar to optimizing for the web. And even if the ROI isn't maybe immediate or even measurable, performing that task, looking at the strategy is valuable nonetheless.
Adam, it feels like what we fall back to as SEOs, and especially when we're helping clients, is this idea that win position 0 and you win the voice search game. And I think
the bonus.
Yeah, it's the bonus ultimately. And it feels like that's how nascent we are. And I think your comment on Wild West is appropriate. But maybe if we can, I'm going to turn this back over to Eric, because I want to create a little bit of orientation for our audience in terms of how important voice search is, especially from a volume standpoint. So, Eric, if you had to guess, what volume of global search traffic do you think voice search will represent in 2019? What do you think our ceiling is in 2019? Eric, that was over to you.
Sorry about that. So the way I think about this metric is I think we're going to get to single-digit percentage points by 2020, and that would be a pretty good yield. And just picking up on what Adam said, the way you started this whole thing is, it's very early days right now, and I think that's the way we need to be looking at the volume side of things. So right now, this is the game for early adopters, but there are reasons to be an early adopter because it's going to take time to learn how to do voice right.
So if I could kind of recap what I'm hearing from you guys, it's pay attention, but don't get overly focused on voice. And pay attention because we're in the Wild West right now, and frankly, you're going to learn enough in the next year plus that it probably is worth the effort, maybe not the return initially.
I would actually say it depends on the industry you're in, and it depends on your budgets. There can be, as Eric mentioned, really strong reasons to be an early adopter and a first mover. So for instance, if you're selling products online, the Amazon algorithm is influenced by sales. So being early to the gate, even with paid elements, can pay off down the line.
Okay.
You become like Amazon's choice and all those benefits.
Yep. Yeah, and I think also, as I noted, it's going to take time to learn how to do it right, like learning how to build a voice user interface and the importance of having a persona in the way you project yourself through voice apps is going to be really incredibly important, and that's going to take some time to figure out. The early adopters are going to have a leg up on that.
Do you think the folks that are focused on informational versus, say, buying searches are ahead of the game here? Do you feel like everybody's really on par when it comes to understanding and performing against voice search?
I think it's certainly
I'll share something that Marco Lonocci. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to share something that Marco Lonocci of Google shared in his keynote at the recent SMX West, which was that voice interactions that they see are 40 times more likely to be action-oriented. And this ties into how adoption will happen. Adoption of new technologies happen when they are fundamentally easier, or make it fundamentally easier to do something than the old alternative. Voice is barely there yet, and when you're able to do a lot of these things a lot easier through voice, that's when it'll become a major way that people do things.
So here's what I'm hearing back from the panel here, and that is pay close attention. Being an early adopter and a first mover is a likely strategy to benefit your organization, but don't get overly caught up in the details because it's still early and the impact is still being understood. And what I'm going to do is, because we have a lot to cover, I'm going to move us on to Google algorithm updates. And thanks for everybody's weighing in on voice search. I know it's a hot topic, and I have to say I've yet to be at a conference where it wasn't a hot topic. Even the content marketing conferences, it's a heavy focus. But we're going to take things back over to you, Eric, and thanks for joining us today. I know that you're from New England. I think the audience needs to know that. And let me start out by saying that we were all excited to see the New England region finally enjoy a major sports championship with the Patriots victory after a glaring 3-month drought following the Red Sox series win. So I'm sure that was horrible for you and the rest of the New England region to go through that gap in championship experience.
It was really a long time to wait, and I'm sure I'm going to win a lot of fans from people listening to this podcast by complaining about the fact that I have to wait a year every time between when my team goes to the Super Bowl. It just seems unfair to me.
Well, we're going to give you the elephant to eat here, if you will, Eric, which is typically the least predictable and biggest topic for one person to handle, and that's Google search algorithm updates. And all kidding aside, you recently predicted that Google's 2000 updates will focus on improving Google's understanding of user intent in order to serve up content that more specifically meets user need. And I think you really did a great job of kind of drilling into this. So talk to us about that and how SEOs can begin shifting focus from, and this has been a theme for years now, right? Shifting a focus from keyword sets to meeting user intent. So Eric, show us how to eat the elephant.
Yeah, no, happy to talk about all that. Though, first of all, in 2018, starting back in March, April, when the landscape got shaken for the first time in 2018, and then again in August, and another one in June, and then September, October, and there was kind of a constant theme across all those updates, improved understanding of user intent and improved evaluation of content quality from a variety of perspectives. And and by the way, these are things that Google has thought about for a long time, but I think we saw an acceleration happen. My suspicion is that their machine learning capabilities are enabling them to dig a lot deeper into these things. Think of the challenge, after all. You get a 2-word keyword phrase from someone, and you're supposed to figure out what they really mean by that. This is not trivial. But And from my point of view, I think we're going to see this continue throughout 2019 and into 2020 and maybe for some time to come, because there's so much more ground to be gained. So one fun example that I'll share is a site that we saw that was publishing very high volumes of content, over 100 pieces a month. They grew from launching their site in 2016 to runaway market leader in terms of SEO visibility using Searchmetrics in 2 years flat. And it was on the strengths of their publishing program, again, more than 100 pieces of content a month. And then in September, October,
I think we might have lost Eric there. He braved his way into the office there in suburban Boston. And I have a feeling that the snowstorm might be affecting his feed.
But to turn what it means to people who are doing SEO and how they do it better, we have to start thinking beyond building our content program around research the 20 most popular keywords on a search topic, write 10 to 20 articles that cover those topics, and then we're done. That doesn't work anymore. You now need to be thinking about all the various niche needs each user has. And I'll explain it like this. Imagine you had 100 users came to your site. Oh, crap. Sorry about the phone. Imagine you had 100 users come to your site, and they all, you asked all of them for 5 questions about what they needed or what they were looking for. And you had 500 data points now at this point, right? If you go through all of those, you will probably find no 2 users identify the same 5 needs, and you'll probably find 300 different needs identified, the great majority of which have very little search volume. So if your goal is to satisfy a large percentage of visitors to your site, you have to start thinking beyond just writing content about what you find in your keyword research.
And Eric, you're in some level forcing a certain amount of discipline on your clients here, because what you're asking them to do is to have this, if you will, somewhat profound level of understanding of the buyer persona and the buyer journey and understanding that. Do you find yourself in this place where quite often you're pressing on that first before you get to the, really what you're talking about at the end of the day is just better themes and understanding so that we're not caught in this cycle of keyword sets?
Absolutely. I mean, you want to understand those personas, and you want to do things like go talk to your customer service people and find out not just the most popular questions, but all the questions that are being asked. Not that you're going to answer every single one with a piece of content, but you're going to answer a lot more than just your keyword research will bring you to. And just to do something from a Google perspective, play with those people also ask boxes. You see them for a given search query, and then, most people might not know this, but when you pick one of those, Google populates 3 new ones at the bottom. So you can pound away at those for a while and get a really large list of different questions that Google thinks are relevant to a query.
And I'm going to bring this back over to you, and thank you, Eric. You really had some interesting takes on what's coming up next for SEO in 2019 in the Voices of Search podcast. And you've been really throughout the year heralding the rise and the importance of optimizing for Amazon pages to show up not only in Amazon, obviously, but in product-related searches on Google. And as I was listening to you talking about in the podcast, I was thinking, this clearly represents a big revenue opportunity for Google. I think that e-commerce angle, the ability to purchase products online, this is the next big kind of revenue front for Google, if you will. And I guess the question back to you is, do you think this is the year we see an update from Google that really optimizes this potential revenue source? Do you think we're some years off from Google trying to maximize that revenue stream for themselves?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think they definitely are working on it. I'm not sure if they'll be ready to launch. They want to make sure that it's ready in this aspect. That they do love betas in certain instances, but especially with the proliferation of Google Home, they're trying to figure out this transaction to bring it back to voices as much as possible. There is a lot of e-commerce. That's a big piece of the pie, and of course, as we've seen more and more ads in the results set, they are recognizing those are primarily transactional in nature, and that's when they're going to show more ads. So you can bet they're working on it. Whether or not it'll be this year or next year, hard to say. But
we know, Adam, that they can be reactive, and I bring up the 2017-2018 lawsuit filed by the EU, where they were able to discover pretty quickly that Google was favoring their own product listings of others. So we know that they can be reactive to it.
Of course.
Well, we're going to move over to RankBrain now, and thank you, Adam and Eric, for weighing in there. I think that maybe I'm going to cast this a bit differently to say that really what we're talking about here is page speed and RankBrain, or let's call it RankBrain, aka content quality versus site performance. I'm going to ask Harrison to start us off here, and really it's let's call it page speed plus RankBrain, and this is not a typical topic pair these days. Let's call it our peanut butter and pickles pairing. If anybody's ever had a pregnant wife, they know what that's like. And Harrison, you recently predicted that Google would de-emphasize using link to set domain and site authority and begin deploying measures typically used by RankBrain. Tell us more about that and help us understand what SEO should be thinking about as they work to balance, really at the end of the day, content quality versus site performance.
Yeah, for sure. I think that this ties in a lot with what Eric was just talking about with, understanding the customization of a query and how there's a relationship between a query and what the landing page is supposed to satisfy as far as intent goes. So this kind of touches on that because I believe that the ceiling on what you're able to rank on is ultimately decided on RankBrain and not necessarily your content. So what I mean by that is that, RankBrain is pulling in elements like, measuring your user experience and trying to figure out when people go to this site, are they getting what they expected to get? Is the CTR with this aligning with the dwell time and so on? Are people actually, staying on this? Does it appear that people are, getting what they expected to get out of this site? So, if you're not getting that, if you're not getting a good dwell time, if people aren't clicking in, even if you have like the most informative content, but you have, bad UX metrics and, people are having a hard time ciphering out what's on your site, then I don't think that your content's going to help you as much as it should. And a good example of what I'm talking about is page speed. So when we talk about page speed, we often think about, making your page as fast as possible. But when we look at the field testing tools and we actually look at like which metrics are weighed the most in terms of what's evaluating like your page speed score, the top weighted things are things like time to interactive or, first contentful paint or, there's a few other ones. But like time to interactive is the top measured one. And why does that matter? Because that represents the amount of time that it takes for the site to be interactive, right, which is a user experience metric. So if it was truly measuring like just who's the fastest site or who's truly the fastest site, then it would be probably looking at more things like, actual download time or server response time. But time to interactive is actually, representative of, getting a good user experience and getting it as fast as possible. And that's why I think that, when we see all these metrics and all these case studies about page speed, about how, your drop-off rate increases after 3 seconds, or, in some Searchmetrics case studies that showed like, you need to be at around like 2 seconds. That's like the sweet spot. Being much faster than 2 seconds doesn't actually help you that much. It's not that, it's faster than another one. It's that there's a drop-off at some point that indicates that users aren't getting what they're looking for due to the UX metrics that are influenced by page speed. So to tie this all back to what I'm talking about with RankBrain is that, I think that the user experience and kind of like what you're getting on the site in terms of how you're experiencing it is ultimately deciding your ceiling more so than the actual content is.
So Harrison, I can feel you in a spreadsheet right now wading through gobs and gobs of Google Lighthouse data. What are you using kind of as your guide? Because you talked about linger time and lag time. These are things we can measure, but what are you using as your guiding light from a data standpoint when you're addressing these issues with clients?
Yeah, so this is actually information that Google has provided us with. They've actually given us, I forget the actual link, but they've actually given us a system that shows that how it weighs, like what it evaluates with page speed. So I know that, for example, like time to interactive is given a score of 5. So it's, weighed, it gets 5 points. And then speed index is given is a score of 4. First meaningful paint is a 3, and then I think CPU idle is a 2, and then first contentful paint is a 1. So we actually have a way to calculate this and see it. And as I'm evaluating those things and seeing how they've actually changed these things around, because I think that like first meaningful pain actually used to be more weighted than it is now. That's kind of where I'm getting this feeling from in terms of what they're actually evaluating. Is it actually truly page speed load time, or is it the metrics that are impacted by things that start with page speed time?
We never lack for data, do we, in the SEO community? It's how we interpret that data and how we really use it to help guide clients. I want to turn this back over to Adam. And Adam, kind of a broad question for you, but generally, where do you find your clients landing between this balance that Harrison's speaking to, which is the content quality versus site performance? And do you feel that pendulum swinging back and forth? Where do you tend to land with clients?
I would say it probably depends on the client context we actually work with. So a lot of what we try to uncover is not necessarily individual algorithmic insights, it's organizational insights. So are our contacts, more technical or on the more content side of the house, and where can they make an impact? They are both important, and just recognizing it's great if you identify something that will make an impact, but if you have a large organization and you're not set up, whether or not you don't have enough budget to do something technically, or maybe you don't have CMS access to a particular folder. I mean, these are enterprise level problems. So just trying to figure out what is the best course of action.
Yeah, and I feel like what we hear quite often in our client base is that the people that are responsible for content and SEO blame the product people for poor site performance. And it does feel like this pendulum is swinging quite a bit over to, and I think this goes to the fact that, and Harrison mentioned this as well, Google is being a lot more forthcoming with data around this. This is lighthouse data and the ability to understand the correlation between very detailed site performance and page and domain performance, and how that's likely to serve up content and how those things succeed. Well, I think what I'd like to do is move us on to our next topic, because I think this is something that's going to go on, the wars, if you will, between content quality and site speed forever and ever. And perhaps we gather next year, folks, and see who has won this war. But I want to give another huge kind of meaty topic over to Eric, and that's the growing impact of mobile first rankings. And I think, Eric, part of the reason I wanted you to weigh in on this is that I think you're looking at this a bit differently than most folks. And I think we all understand that Google is prioritizing mobile above desktop in terms of what type of, what the SERPs are serving up and what's ranking. But you recently cautioned marketers on the Voice of the Search podcast not to lose focus on desktop devices. And I thought that was really interesting. Why don't you help us understand why?
Sure, no, happy to do that. And I'll give a little bit of backdrop, first of all, to support the importance of mobile, and then lead into why I think desktop is still really important. Our data, we have pulled data on 0.9 trillion, call it an even trillion web search, website visits via SimilarWeb, actually, and 60% of those visits were from mobile devices. And so it says most of the visits are starting on mobile. And which, hey, that's great. And, Google started talking about mobile first in November of 2016, and they're still not done in getting us there. And it's partly because Google doesn't want to move sites over that are going to immediately dramatically lose ranking, particularly if they happen to be sites that will cause them to have a decrease in the quality of their search results. And it's right thinking, most of the visits to my website originate from a mobile device. Shouldn't I, design for mobile first? And not enough people are doing this. And maybe I should start with a smartphone version of my website and design that, and then extract the desktop site from that rather than the other way around, which is what most people do. But at the end of the day, the thing that I think is important for us to remember is that there is also data out there that says the majority of site conversion data is still the conversion is still happening on desktops. There's a Googler, I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but it's data that is 2 years old, but that isn't that long ago, that said 75% of conversions were still happening on desktop. 75%. Well, that says to me the desktop is pretty important. and probably will gradually decline over time. But remember, old technologies rarely get eliminated entirely by new ones. There are people who still listen to radio today, right? And there's so many other ways to listen to music online, but yet there's still people who get in their car and they turn on the radio stations, and that's what they listen to. So desktop is going to be around for a while, and it's going to be important for conversions for a long time. So don't forget it entirely. It really remains an important part of your overall digital marketing mix.
I want to, that's a great summary. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that that's a pretty underrated point. When I'm looking at a lot of my own clients, the CVRs for, most industries tend to still be higher on desktop. So, at the end of the day, what SEO is really supposed to do is support a business. And, what we can't forget about desktop, like we have to keep in mind that, a lot of times it is easier to shop on desktop just due to the nature of it. I personally, as a shopper, will never make like a huge, large purchase on a mobile device probably, just because like to me the pricing and shopping comparisons and all of those kind of QA steps are just a lot more streamlined on desktop. So I think that that's a really underrated point to kind of keep it in mind, because I think that it's going to be easier for a long time as well to convert on desktop for a lot of industries.
Well, for among other things, larger screens, larger keyboards.
Yeah, there's less friction, just less friction.
Yeah. So how do you guys help clients navigate this? Because this is tricky, and I think the 75% number is a number that occurred to me as well, Eric. And again, this gets back to this idea that people are doing a lot of their initial research on mobile devices, but a lot of their purchasing on the desktop. How do you advise clients, especially those that are looking at, let's say, a design overhaul, a mobile-first overhaul? How do you help guide them through that process? How do you help them prioritize?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and I mean basically the kinds of things we try to get them to think about. Well, we do actually tell them to try to map out their smartphone-size site design at least simultaneously with their desktop design. So we do start with that mobile focus, right? But it tied us a little bit into what Harrison was saying in his piece a moment ago. You got to really be looking at the user experience, consumer experience in both environments, right? So if I'm going to get most of my visitors arriving on mobile, how does that use case differ? Given that I know that Google is ranking based on mobile first, how do I make sure that all the things that are going to drive ranking for me are still happening on mobile? And yet, over on the desktop side, to tie back to what Adam said a moment ago, how do I make sure that I'm offering a great conversion experience for the shopper who has come on over to the desktop, or the researcher for that matter? If I'm researching, let's say I just found out I have diabetes and I've got 12 articles I want to read, I'm probably going to want a bigger screen for that too, right? That's another use case that might drive desktop behavior. So how do I create the right experiences for users over there so that I take advantage of this kind of dual modality of how people are operating today?
I think it's funny. I think we could all tie this easily back to our big elephant-eating question for you, Eric, in terms of what's coming up with the next Google algorithm updates, because they've been pretty public and forward on their preference for mobile. But I feel like there's this reckoning coming, exactly to your point, Eric, which is that 75% of purchases are still occurring on the desktop. So I'm going to move us over to our final topic, which is SERP Revolution. And I think that if you've been in the industry long enough to remember the Panda update, or even just 3 years ago when Google added 3 more paid search results to the typical SERP, we know things have changed really radically. And I think we can declare the era of text-only SERPs dead, if you will. I think it's pretty hard to find a text-only SERP these days. And we know that SERPs now include, and I'm not going to get everything on this list, but I would say off the top of my head, we're now seeing video carousels, image carousels, featured snippets, rich snippets, knowledge graphs, and we're starting to see product punch-throughs. And we talked a bit about how potentially Google might adjust for that as a revenue source. if we're looking just at informational searches, you're likely to see featured snippets, knowledge panels, and suggested content. And I think we all understand that underlying all of this ultimately is Google's ongoing march to ensure that the most relevant content is offered up to their clients. And I think the underlying capability that we're seeing here that they're getting better and better at is they're able to, and this almost always goes back to RankBrain, but they're better able to understand URL and page structure. And in many ways, I think they're ignoring what has been our kind of bedrock, which is our meta, our H1s, or H2s, and it's this overwhelming wave of content quality. But if I were to summarize this quickly, Google's getting really good at understanding context and being able to parse and dissect data on a URL level. And I think this is going to enable really another wave, if you will, of SERP changes. So I wanted to bring that back to the panel. It's our final topic. Do you agree that this represents Google's increasing capability to crawl on the URL level and to parse data? And where do you think that leads us next? Harrison, why don't you start us off?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that we're going to see like a lot of testing this year. Just earlier, like last month, I noticed on a knowledge panel that, in a place that Wikipedia, or sorry, I didn't actually notice this, his teammate did, but in a spot where Wikipedia would usually take up, had been replaced with like a listing that looked almost like just a normal listing. It had like a title tag and a meta description, and it was in the same exact spot as Wikipedia would be for like a pretty informational query, but it was actually like a listing there. So to me, that was almost like, this kind of showed me that Google's, going to be doing a lot of testing in terms of, maybe finding other ways to entice people to click through, right? Because that's the first thing that I thought of, is that people usually aren't clicking through on Wikipedia knowledge panels. And, if you're putting a link directly in the place where that usually would have been and giving it a little featured slot, maybe it's trying to incentivize people to be more active on the SERP. So, I definitely can see, it's hard to say like what integrations and what direction they're going to go to exactly, but I can definitely see, a lot more things like that happening this year for sure.
Yeah, Harrison, I think you make a really good point. You hear this again and again, which is, especially rich and featured snippets, what's the benefit? What's the value if the customer, if you will, is getting everything they need in just that little area, and are they punching through? And it does feel like Google is going to start making adjustments there. But I'd like to hear back from Adam and Eric. Do you guys have a bold SERP 2019 prediction for us?
Well, I don't know if you saw.
Prediction.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if you guys caught, there was a great article in Wired about Google taking steps toward killing the URL. I think as schema markups help search engines better understand context, and again, whether or not you personally use voice search, I think the impact is recognizing that Google's goal is to organize the world's information. They're trying to answer people's questions. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And there will definitely be more testing within the result set.
So we're predicting the death of URL. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, yeah. Even if it's not directly killed off, I think recognizing that it's about content elements as opposed to pages, I think that's the main takeaway.
Do we think anything's going to change on the paid SERP, guys? It feels like every time Google's feeling pressure on the earnings calls, something changes on the paid side. And I have to say, to your untrained consumer, it's very hard to distinguish between the paid SERPs and the organic. Do we think that's a possibility for 2019?
Well, it's an interesting question, but my take on this is, and by the way, I've seen recent data that suggests that even with the real estate that Google has taken up with paid search, that 75% of the clicks still go to organic results. So that would suggest that most users actually do know, even though it's not, flashing, screaming monkeys telling you that it's an ad. They do know what's an ad and what's not, and they tend to click on ads when they want to be sold to, and don't when they don't. But I do think that they're going to, the whole point of testing, I 100% agree. I think one of the big upshots of what they've been able to do with machine learning is both to, well, across the board here, both to my point about the role of content and user intent measurement, but also in terms of a SERP layout, their capacity to test new things and gather meaningful data in a shorter period of time, I think that has gone up significantly. So I do think we're going to see testing happening faster and faster.
I would say, I agree, Eric, with how you're seeing the world, but I would say that those earnings calls can be really stressful, and I wouldn't be surprised to seeing some change on the paid media front, especially when it comes to placement in SERPs, just such an easy way to drive additional revenue. So folks, that's all the time we have for today. I really want to extend a big thank you to our panelists, Adam, Eric, and Harrison. Thank you for being with us today. Thanks for your participation on the Voices of Search podcast. And for those of you that have participated today, want to share what you've learned with colleagues, you will be receiving an email with a recorded version of this webinar. I would highly suggest that take your time to go over and spend some time with the Voices of Search podcast. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us via hello@searchmetrics.com. If you have questions for us or any of our panelists today, you can contact us there. Thank you, team. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.